My name is Elaine. My mom looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Nobody needs your money or you, Elaine." My sister smirked, raising her glass like she agreed. That was the last time I ever sat at that table as their daughter. Because by the time I was done, the same people who said they didn't need me would be fighting to get a seat at my table. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you loved most, if your own family made you feel small, unwanted, or replaceable, hit that like button and subscribe. Because this story, it's about finding power in walking away and making sure those who broke you realize exactly what they lost. If you've ever been the responsible one in your family, the one everyone calls when they need something, then you'll understand me perfectly. I grew up in a small town where my parents, Thomas and Linda, were local legends. They ran a family hardware business, something that had been passed down for generations. My older sister, Rebecca, was the golden child, charming, loud, and always the center of attention. I was the quiet one, the bookworm. I wasn't a problem child, just invisible. When I graduated top of my class, my parents barely mentioned it. But when Rebecca got engaged to her high school sweetheart, the entire town was invited to a 2-day celebration. That was the balance of love in our house. Applause for her, silence for me. Still, I didn't complain. I loved them. I wanted to make them proud. After college, I moved to the city and started my own interior design company. It was small at first, just me, a laptop, and coffee-stained sketches on my apartment floor. But I was hungry to succeed. I took every client, worked sleepless nights, and poured my soul into every project. Within 5 years, I had a name, Elaine Hart Designs was featured in magazines, and I bought my first home. When I drove back to my hometown for visits, my parents would ask questions that sounded supportive but carried tiny jabs. "Oh, city life must be expensive. Are you sure people actually pay for that kind of decorating?" And Rebecca would roll her eyes whenever someone complimented me. She'd say things like, "Elaine just gets lucky. People love a fancy Instagram page." It stung, but I brushed it off. I told myself they didn't mean it. When the pandemic hit, my parents' hardware store started to crumble. My dad's health was declining, and the business took a major hit. Without thinking twice, I wired them $60,000, enough to cover bills and payroll. They thanked me once. Then it became expected. Every few months, there was another emergency. A broken truck, unpaid supplier invoices, some medical bills. I kept helping because I thought that's what family does. Rebecca, meanwhile, did nothing. She and her husband were living rent-free in one of my parents' houses, posting vacation photos while I paid off their debts. But my parents called her the glue of the family. The final straw came at a family dinner last spring. It was supposed to be a small get-together. My parents, Rebecca and her husband, and me. I just landed a massive design contract with a luxury hotel group, a dream project. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd be proud. Dinner started normal. I told them about the project, how I'd be traveling for months to oversee renovations in Miami. My mom smiled faintly and said, "Well, that's nice, dear. But you know, not everything is about money." Rebecca laughed. "Yeah, Elaine. You act like success is the same as being happy. We actually spend time with people. I try to keep my cool. I'm not showing off. I just thought you'd be happy for me." That's when my dad set his fork down, his voice sharp. "Elaine, we don't need your money or your attitude." "Nobody does." The room went silent. I stared at him, waiting for my mom to say something. Anything, to take it back. Instead, she nodded. "Your father's right. You think throwing money around makes you better than us. But we were fine before your so-called success. Nobody needs your money or you." Rebecca leaned back, smiling. Finally, someone said it. I felt my throat tighten, my hands trembling. They didn't just reject my help, they rejected me. So I stood up, swallowed the lump in my throat, and said quietly, "You're right. You don't need me." Then I walked out. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't visit. What they didn't know was that for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away in defeat. I was walking away in clarity. And soon they'd realize exactly what it meant to tell me they didn't need me. When I left that night, I didn't just walk out of their house. I walked out of a version of myself that was desperate for approval. At first, I thought maybe they'd call, maybe they'd apologize once they realized I wasn't around to solve their problems anymore. But the silence stretched on for weeks. Months. Then came the rumors. Small towns thrive on gossip, and my family was practically their favorite show. I started hearing from old classmates that my sister had been telling people I'd abandoned my parents when they needed me most. That I'd become too rich and too proud to care. Funny, considering I was the only reason their lights were still on 6 months earlier. I ignored it at first, but what made my stomach turn was when a client from my hometown called to cancel a renovation project. She said awkwardly, "I just don't want to be involved in family drama. Rebecca told me things. I think it's best we part ways." That's when I realized it wasn't just petty gossip. My sister was sabotaging me. The next few weeks, I watched as my name got dragged through the mud on small-town social pages. Posts saying things like, "Money changes people," or "Some folks forget where they came from." Rebecca was behind all of it. And my parents? Silent. Not one word in my defense. I'd spent my life building a business from the ground up, and now my own family was trying to tear it down out of spite. Then came the part that truly broke me. I got a notice from the bank. The hardware store, the one I had saved with my money, had defaulted again. Except this time, my name was listed as a co-signer. I never signed anything. But when I checked the documents, I realized what happened. They'd used my original transfer as proof that I was a financial backer. My father had signed my name on a renewal form. Forgery. I felt sick. Not just at the betrayal, but at how easily they'd done it. Like my trust had been a blank check all along. I tried calling my dad. He didn't pick up. My mom texted one line. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Family helps family. Family helps family." Those words echoed in my head, the same family that told me nobody needed me. That night, I sat on my balcony staring at the city lights below, tears hot on my face, and made a decision. I wasn't going to just protect myself this time. I was going to make sure they never used my name again. Not for sympathy, not for money, and definitely not for power. It was time for my family to learn what happens when you push the quiet one too far. A few days after discovering the forgery, I sat in my office staring at the signed documents, my hands trembling. My name, my actual signature, replicated in my father's handwriting. It wasn't even a good imitation. It was rushed, like he didn't think I'd ever bother to check. That's when it finally hit me. My family didn't just take advantage of me, they thought I'd never stand up for myself. 4 years, I'd been their safety net, their backup plan, their silent ATM. And now that I was gone, they were desperate enough to commit a crime to keep my money flowing. I called my lawyer, Daniel, a friend I'd known since college. He took one look at the paperwork and said, "Elaine, this is serious. You could take them to court for this." I laughed bitterly. Sue my own parents? What would that make me? He leaned back, his expression sharp. "It would make you someone who finally stops letting people walk all over her." That sentence stayed with me. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the anger I'd been swallowing for years. I replayed every moment in my head. My mother's disapproving stares, my father's lectures about humility, Rebecca's smug smirk when I succeeded. They'd made me feel guilty for winning. But I wasn't going to feel guilty anymore. I wanted to cut them off quietly at first, just dissolve the co-signing issue and move on. But when I contacted the bank to fix it, they told me something that flipped the entire story upside down. Apparently, Rebecca had been using the family's business account to pay for her own boutique startup. She'd taken out loans under the hardware store's name, claiming I was a financial guarantor. She was using my success, my credibility, to fuel her lies. That was my breaking point. The woman who spent her life mocking my work had no problem stealing the image I'd built. That night, I went through every email, every bank document, and every wire transfer I'd ever sent them. I built a digital folder, Project Clean Slate, and filled it with proof. Forged documents, mismatched signatures, bank transfers, and even Rebecca's bragging posts about her new business venture. The next morning, I called Daniel. "I'm ready," I said simply. He didn't ask what that meant. He just replied, "Then let's make it hurt, legally, financially, and publicly." The quiet daughter they dismissed was gone. In her place was someone they never expected, someone patient, strategic, and entirely done being their victim. I wasn't just planning revenge. I was preparing a reckoning. I didn't want revenge that looked like a tantrum. I wanted it to be precise, legal, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. So I built a plan that moved like gears: documentation, legal pressure, and a public mirror they couldn't look away from. Step 1 was the bank. With Daniel at my side, I opened a formal dispute and handed over the folder I'd built, the original wire transfers, timestamped emails, and the phony renewal with my signature. The bank froze the hardware store's accounts pending investigation. I watched the teller's face go from polite to awkward in a way that felt like a small, private victory. But freezing an account would only make them desperate. I needed to cut the thread that held Rebecca's lies together: her clients, suppliers, and the sympathetic gossip mill. So I compiled a timeline showing how money flowed from the store to her boutique, cross-referenced invoices she'd fabricated, and pulled screenshots of her own posts bragging about launching on the family dime. Every anomaly I found, I annotated. Then I did something I'd never done before. I drafted a letter and sent it to 3 places: the bank's fraud department, the small-town newspaper, and a consumer protection reporter in the city. I didn't write it in rage. I wrote it with facts. Attached are documents alleging forgery and misrepresentation. Please investigate. It landed in inboxes like a clean, cold stone. When the local paper called my parents for a comment, they stumbled. My mom's voice trembled. My father's silence was louder than any defense. Rebecca tried to spin it on social media, calling it a family misunderstanding, but by then the bank's investigator had already requested original signed contracts and supplier records. Suppliers were interviewed. The boutique's credit lines were audited. Lease agreements were flagged. Doors that had been opened to Rebecca suddenly began to close. I arranged a meeting, not at their house, not in private, but at the town hall, during a community fundraiser they boasted about hosting. I RSVP'd as a guest of honor because the last place they expected me to show up was under the town's bright lights. The hall smelled of coffee and cheap candles. Rebecca was radiant in a dress she'd posted about all week. My parents sat in the front row, faces painted with that brittle composure people wear when they're about to be exposed. I didn't stand up to yell. I didn't throw accusations like confetti. I walked to the podium with a folder in my hand, and my voice was calm. Some of you remember how the hardware store kept this town going, I said. You may also have seen my sister's boutique flourish. I think you deserve to know the full story. I laid out the timeline, showed the bank freeze notice, and read excerpts from emails that proved the forgery and the diversion of funds. The room shifted. Whispers rose like a tide. I saw Rebecca's mouth open and close, saw my mother's hand clamp over her lip. Faces I'd known since childhood looked at me with a new, puzzled respect. It wasn't about humiliation for me, it was about truth. Legally, the consequences followed quickly. The bank filed a criminal complaint. Suppliers demanded repayment. Rebecca's boutique lost its merchant account and a pending wholesale contract. My parents were forced to reckon with audits and police interviews. The town wasn't savage, people were simply shocked. That shock transformed into distance. Friends stopped inviting Rebecca to launch parties, and vendors stopped extending credit. When my father finally called, voice low and empty, he asked, "Why did you have to make it public?" I answered simply, "Because you forged my name. You lied to everyone for months. You gave her my credibility and took what wasn't hers. If you'd wanted help, you could have asked. Instead, you hid it." My throat was steady. For the first time, I wasn't pleading to be seen. I was setting a boundary. The quiet, surgical way I'd executed it left no room for reinterpretation. They couldn't claim misunderstanding, couldn't chalk it up to drama. The proof was written. The law was engaged. And the town, which had once admired Rebecca's smile and dismissed mine, now had the facts. Revenge, I learned, doesn't have to be loud to hurt. It just has to be inevitable. The fallout came quietly, not like the explosion my family expected, but like slow erosion. A week after the fundraiser, the local paper published an investigative piece titled "Family Business Fraud: The Hidden Cost of Trust." It didn't use our last name directly, but everyone knew. In a small town, anonymity is a myth. Rebecca's boutique shut its doors within days. Her Instagram vanished overnight, the once perfect feed of designer outfits and fake positivity replaced with silence. My parents' hardware store went into receivership soon after. The bank refused to reopen the accounts until restitution was made. For the first time in my life, They couldn't use my name to fix their mess. They had to face the world exactly as they were without me. I wish I could say I felt triumph, but what I really felt was peace. Weeks later, I got a letter from my mom. It wasn't long, just one page written in her tidy, looping handwriting. Elaine, we didn't realize what we were doing until it was too late. Your father is ashamed. Rebecca won't speak to anyone. You've made your point, and I hope someday you'll forgive us. I read it 3 times, searching for sincerity between the lines. There was guilt, sure, but not understanding. They were sorry they'd been caught, not sorry they'd broken me. So I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and wrote my own version of closure. I donated the recovered funds, every cent from the legal settlement and reimbursement, to a women's business foundation that helps small-town entrepreneurs start over honestly. I named the scholarship Project Clean Slate. Every year, it funds one woman who's been told she's too ambitious, too loud, or too much. The kind of woman my family would have tried to silence. The more I built, the smaller their betrayal became. I realized that my revenge wasn't really about destroying them. It was about reclaiming the version of myself they tried to bury. The one who no longer needed to prove she was worth keeping. Months later, I returned to town, not for confrontation but for closure. The hardware store building was for sale, boarded up, empty. I stood there for a long minute, listening to the echo of what used to be my family's pride, now just dust and silence. Rebecca passed by on the opposite sidewalk. She didn't meet my eyes. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she finally understood. I smiled, not cruelly, but with the kind of calm you only feel after surviving something heavy. Walking away from them had once felt like loss. Now it felt like freedom. Sometimes, revenge isn't about payback, it's about proof. Proof that you can rise without their approval, succeed without their support, and live without their validation. The sweetest revenge, I learned, is indifference wrapped in success. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen? And remember, sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's the strongest move you'll ever make. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of betrayal, justice, and sweet revenge.